Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Shogun Episode 8. It's called The Abyss of Life. So spoilers for the episode. And this one really yanks you back and forth in terms of understanding what Toranaga is up to. You know, we ended the last episode and I was pretty, I was pretty confident. I was like, Toranaga is up to something. He's got a plan. He's not simply just surrendering. And I think what's so smart about this episode is that it really plays with the fact that the audience is thinking that way. It plays with the fact that you're hoping that he's up to something, but of course he's dealing with the death of his son in this episode. He seems to be getting sick, and immediately I was like, he's faking it. He's looking weak intentionally so that people think he's an easy target, or he's ready to give up. And there's a great moment in the middle of this episode where Toranaga, who's been kind of hiding from everyone, has a meeting with the Dutch priest and a couple. And Mariko's there, the old man's there, and basically says, "Yeah, we're going to hand everything over. I'll honor the agreement and let you build a church here, yada yada." But he does a whole song and dance here where he's very sick in front of them and makes it clear that he's intending on going to Osaka and turning himself in to present it all as being hopeless. And as soon as they get out of this meeting, the old man turns to the others, like Buntaro and Yubashiga, and says he's planning to fight. And they're like, wait, why can you be so sure? Because he's making sure that the priest goes back and tells them what he saw. And I don't think he would do that unless he was willing to fight. And this brought a smile to my face because I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, so even his close allies are recognizing that this is some kind of ploy. But what the episode does from that point on is that it even gets them to a point where they really start to question if he is actually just giving up. And if he is just giving up, then what is their loyalty worth? Are they being fools for following this man to a demise? And alternatively, this idea that really comes up during the episode is that if you're loyal to someone, even if they give up on themselves, you still have to be there for them. So even if they don't believe in themselves anymore, you still have to be there to believe in them. It goes beyond their own sort of self-respect kind of thing. And that was a really interesting idea to come up as well. But this all keeps bubbling until we have this other meeting, which Toranaga set up, where he wants all of these generals who seem to be a little defiant about this whole giving up thing, and they're wearing their armor, they're sort of making a show that they're planning on fighting. He wants them to all sign an agreement that they're going to surrender along with him. And this is kind of, it's not the final scene of the episode, but it's the big set piece scene towards the end of the episode, where one of them says, no, this is foolish. If we make them come here and fight, we'll have a chance. Because we're in Edo, by the way. We're in the city that Toranaga is from. And that's where this is all set. So we're kind of back in home turf, as it were. And the old man, Buntaro's father, and I know his name, but I've been calling him the old man the whole show, so he's the old man. He sort of puts across the idea in this scene that he's really starting to doubt if Toranaga is really going to surrender. He's actually feeling doubt, and he's questioning his loyalty now at this point, to the point where he says, if you don't admit that you've got a plan, if you're really planning on surrendering, I will commit seppuku right now. It's this big dramatic scene, and it just keeps bubbling to the point where Buntaro has to come over and be his second and sort of cut off his head at the end of the scene. But the whole scene's very emotional. You get all these close-ups of Toranaga's face as he's watching this happen, and it's clearly causing him pain. And the whole thing presents like this is the old man admitting that Toranaga's going to let himself fail, and that this suicide is supposed to try and inspire a different outcome, to protest what he's doing. It really does present this idea that he really is about to give up, that he really is surrendering. Now, in the back of my head, I'm thinking this is exactly what you do if you want to then swerve it and say that this is all actually a plan. It's just they have to be so devout to it that it involves the old man actually committing suicide as part of the plan. Not that I think Toranaga had ever told him you need to do this. Toranaga, when he's talking to Mariko afterwards, just kind of makes it clear that no, the old man knew what his role was. He understands what his purpose is. yeah, he basically just like straight up admits to Mariko that this is inspiring Blackthorne or Yubashiga specifically to act in a certain way, and this is all part of his plan. He compares them to the birds. You right? Remember the whole Raven thing from earlier in the season, where he's talking about how like they're short range, but you can predict what they're going to do, so they're very useful, and he knows you know how to use them strategically. And says, Mariko, it's time for you to do your part. And she's like, yes. I actually thought this was going to be the end of the episode because the way she kind of looks at the camera as she says, yes, I'm ready, really felt like a ramp up to a credits moment. But one of the other things I really liked about this scene is him comparing both Blackthorne and Yubashiga is similar. I really liked because earlier on in this episode, I actually had the realization that Blackthorne is probably just the English version of Yubashiga. He goes to Yubashiga. Actually, I'll rewind further, actually. It sets up that he's going to go meet his old man, right? And the Dutch priest even says to him, are you going to go and dress like that? Are you going to wear these Japanese clothes when you go and speak to him? And he's like, yeah, whatever. So we get this scene where he's walking down this dark alleyway towards this bar where the rest of the Dutch are all hanging out. But he gets second thoughts. He clearly gets second thoughts when he actually sees one of them stumble out and he tries to leave. It's just that the guy kind of notices him and yells over at him. And very quickly, this whole idea that the entire show Blackthorne's been saying, I need to get back to my men, we need to take our ship back, we need to conclude our mission. Very quickly, it seems like, yeah, these men didn't really believe in what he was doing. In fact, this guy accuses him of going for glory and like taking them out here when they didn't really need to, that they could have just went home instead of coming to Japan. And this was kind of like, between this and the follow-up scene where he goes to Yubashiga to ask if he can sail for Yubashiga because Toranaga's cut him loose. He's like, hey, I can sail for you. I can work for you, Yubashiga. You're a shithead, but I respect you well enough. You understand controlling your own fate. He references the whole Yubashiga almost dying at the cliffs back in like episode 2. All of that. And I had this realization between these two scenes that he very much is just Yubashiga from England or with the Dutch, in the sense that he is willing to just sort of change allegiances to attain what he thinks he wants. And it's maybe this interesting comparison between the two. And it suddenly makes sense in hindsight why Yubashiga's been such a prominent character. The whole point of his character in a lot of ways is to gradually learn that the way he's acting is kind of who Blackthorne was, and arguably to an extent still is. Whether or not they come out at the end of this story having grown from that is another, thing. We'll see. We'll see where we go in the last 2 episodes. But I do really think that's a cool little comparison between the two. So I felt like, not vindicated, but like it felt nice when Toranaga basically said that later on. He said they're both like the birds. They're both short-range birds. You can predict what they're going to do, and this is all part of his plan. And part of the old man's death was to inspire Yubashiga to do this, even though earlier on he said that this would be a betrayal of his lord, which was rich coming from him because he was trying to betray Toranaga multiple times in the first half of the show. But this is going to convince him, we have to go. Which actually extends, interestingly, to his nephew. I think he's quite interesting this episode. I wouldn't say he's ever been a super fascinating character on his own. Typically, he's in love with the prostitute. He's jealous about that. He's been kind of, much like Toranaga's son, was kind of ready to prove himself. But I thought he had a couple of really interesting scenes in this one. Particularly the scene where they're having kind of not a eulogy, but they're sitting around sharing stories of Toranaga's son. Basically, he jumps in and kind of sticks up for him a little bit, and it was actually kind of sweet in a weird way, even though they've never been super likable as a pair. It actually came across quite well that he was sticking up for his friend, and he kind of blames Toranaga for giving in, which inspired what his son did. And it does kind of raise this other question, if Toranaga intentionally provoked his son into doing something, because at the end of the episode, Toranaga goes to the funeral site, because he didn't go to the funeral earlier. There's a great shot early on in the episode where the fire of the burning coffin can be seen across the city, and Toranaga is watching from a rooftop. It's a really, really nice shot early in the episode. But at the end of the episode, he goes to this, this funeral site where you can still see all the burned ground from where the fire was. He basically says, "Thank you for giving me some time," because that's one of the plot details here, is that he's been given like 40 days to mourn his son in his city before he has to go and surrender. And the thought did cross my mind, did he actually engineer his son to do this, making it even colder that Toranaga, he's already cold enough that the old man killed himself for him, and that was kind of in service of his plan, and he's using it wisely now. And even the way he says it, where you and the old man both, hey, like, you both have bought me some time, you've both given me an opportunity, it does raise the question, was the son's death intentional as well, or was that more of a happy accident? And the show, I don't think, outright says it, but to be honest, given the phrasing at the end of this episode, I'm kind of leaning towards he pushed his son into this. I think he knew his son was going to try something. Maybe, yeah, it feels that way. It feels like he was willing to sacrifice his son to achieve what he's about to achieve. Which, definitely makes him cold. It definitely makes him calculating, which does line up with everything we've kind of learned about him up until this point in the show. But it's interesting because we're kind of rooting for him, because the show's presented him as the one that is on the side of right, I guess, in this conflict. But that's all a perception thing, I guess, more than anything else. All that stuff was super, super fascinating. Mariko has a couple of interesting scenes as well, on top of the stuff where she's involved with the others, where Buntaro is trying to kind of reach out to her a little bit and makes her tea. They go through this little ceremony, and he basically says, hey, given what Toranaga is planning to do, how about we check out early? What if I finally grant you death and we can die together? We can go into the afterlife as husband and wife. And she kind of shuts him down and says, you still don't understand. I'd rather live for 1,000 years than do that. I could have seen him getting angry here and lashing out. Instead, he breaks down and cries. And I think the realization that he never really understood his wife or what she wants is probably settling in at this point. Because he starts off this scene by saying, hey, does the Anjin, does Blackthorne still have a spell over you? And I think on some level he might, but obviously I don't think it's in the way that he means it. We've talked a lot about why they appealed to each other, that she could be more open with him and talk about how she feels in a way that she can't talk to her own husband or indeed any other of the Japanese men that are around, and that having this language barrier protects her from anyone else understanding what she's saying to him. And of course, there's also the way that Blackthorne has responded to this. He's actually wanted to talk and listen to her in a way that it's clear Buntaro does not listen to her. It's just not part of his nature. But I think credit to the show here, where I feel like at this point now, we're in the end game now, we got 2 episodes left. It's definitely taken some of these characters, much like Omi, Yubashika's nephew, in Buntaro, and has made them a little bit more layered. Like, they're not just like, Buntaro was very easy just to dislike. He just kind of came across as a dickhead husband back at the start of the show, and it feels a little bit more layered now between this scene where he's genuinely emotional that him and his wife just are not connecting on any level, and there's seemingly no way to fix that because it was maybe, it was never a real romance in the first place, and him trying to sort of claw that back together being futile. On some level, you can kind of sympathize what he's going through, and then between that and then him having to chop his own father's head off, which is a really well shot and well performed scene, I think they've done a good job of making him a bit more in depth. Where I'm not going to say I like him as a person or I even root for him, but I don't think it's as simple anymore as, he's a dick and I dislike him. Like, it's a bit more complex than that. I think Blackthorne as well equally was made a lot more complex this episode, with how everything he's been saying he's been wanting to go away and do this entire season. I want to go get my men, I want to get back on my ship and continue our mission, to sort of get to the point where we realize, or at least reminded, because there was definitely some dialogue between them back in episode 1 when they were on the boat that probably hinted at some of this, but it definitely paints him in a very different light. And it's kind of an interesting comparison between Blackthorne and Buntaro, that the way Buntaro like always presents himself has been really tied to his marriage and his wife, and he's got all these ideas that he has saved her from death by not allowing her to commit suicide, and that he believes in his marriage, but it's not really real. Blackthorne, kind of, you can compare Blackthorne to that, and the way Blackthorne talks about his ship and the way he talks about his mission with his men. We kind of realize this episode that that's also something that he's been kind of, I don't know if delusional is quite the right word, but much like Buntaro, not understanding that his marriage was never really based on any feelings or actual romance or love, this mission that he believes he's on with his men doesn't seem to have been based on this mutual goal or genuine orders. He says there's orders, but it kind of sounds like it isn't real. It sounds like they could have had a choice or something. I think that's an interesting comparison between the two. And Buntaro becoming to reckon with the idea that his marriage isn't what he thought. At the same time, Blackthorne is coming to realize that his mission and his crew and his ship aren't quite this solid thing in his life that he thought. That obviously also leads to this idea that Blackthorne feels like he's caught between two worlds now. He's changed too much to just be one of the Dutch or English, but he's also not quite Japanese. He feels caught between two places now. He doesn't really belong anywhere. And I think that element of feeling lost is something that both him and Buntaro actually share right now, which is a very interesting comparison to make. And then Achiba's got stuff going on as well. Ishido tries to propose to her to strengthen their bond, and I don't think she's very interested. And it's interesting that Ishido is kind of almost groveling, and he's kind of nervous and is trying to form this union. And I don't think, like, just because he's been such this tough character this whole show, that he's seeking this from her, that he's subservient, and she is the one with power in this scene, at least for now, right? It could go a number of different ways, but I did think that was a very interesting dynamic. But her mother has a stroke this episode and is dying, seemingly throughout, which feels like an attempt to humanize her. Honestly, one of the things, of course, that I was excited about after we got those flashbacks a couple of episodes ago was the idea of Mariko and Achiba being on screen together again and seeing how that reunion might shape things up. Because it's suggested in the scene with the priestess episode, what if you could form an alliance with Achiba, between Toranaga and Achiba? And he's like, I don't think she would want to. Hey, Mariko, you know her. Would she ever want to ally with me? And she's very kind of vague in her answer, but she says that she doesn't fear you. She fears... Oh, sorry. Her enemy's not you. Her enemy is fear. That was the gist of the sentence. And Toranaga's like not convinced. He's like, nah, she'd hate me. It feels like, I don't know, it feels like maybe there will be something with Achiba, especially given Mariko and Achiba's history. But of course, Achiba's naturally got some problems with Toranaga based on their past. I think this episode was very well done in how it had a lot of disparate elements that felt like they were fairly separate, right? It was Blackthorne looking for his men. It was Toranaga dealing with the funeral and everyone asking what to do about the surrender. You've got the stuff with Mariko and Buntaro. You've got the little other things with Achiba and Ishido, which I still felt relatively separate, but all of the other stuff by the end all kind of came together. Like everything with Blackthorne and Yubishiga, by the end of the episode, all felt like it wrapped neatly into what Toranaga was up to. Like, by the time we get to that scene with him and Mariko, almost every thread, at least in Edo, right? The stuff in Osaka is maybe slightly separate still, but everything else in Edo, all of a sudden felt like it all connected together, both thematically and just how the characters are being motivated. Because the other thing I was getting to with Yubishiga's nephew is that he's kind of losing this idea of loyalty, where he's like, is it worth... Like, what am I even fighting for anymore? Like, the death of his friend has really screwed him up. Like, he's definitely questioning what he's actually doing now, and is this loyalty worth something? And I think it's an interesting question to answer, because or to ask, I should say, because ultimately, like, this show has been poking at Blackthorne's perspective, and indeed a modern audience's perspective, of a lot of these cultural traditions and the expectations of seppuku and the expectations of loyalty, no matter what, and questioning, are these things that are good? Should these things change in any meaningful way? And I wonder, to some extent, how I'm going to feel about Toranaga come the end of episode 10. Like, will he have achieved something where I'm going to go as an audience member, I understand and I actually kind of agree that everything that happened in this show was worth this outcome, that you are not some villainous person for making sure this went through? Or am I going to get to the end of this and feel like it's more of a critique of this person and this system and this idea of loyalty above all else? I mean, loyalty obviously is in its own, in a vacuum, is a good thing. Loyalty is great. It's nice to have someone who's loyal to you, or to be loyal to someone else. Great things. But this idea of being loyal to the extent that these characters are, and the expectations placed upon them, I think, this show naturally has you questioning some of those things as it goes on, and you see what characters are giving up. And having one of the younger characters question it, I think, is really smart, especially a younger. It's one thing for Blackthorne to question it because he's just like an alien to these people, but for Omi to question it, for him to question it and start to think maybe this isn't the right way, maybe things should change. The idea that the younger generation of Japan wants to try and evolve it and change it a little bit and has become disillusioned with the old ways, feels like a good thread to have. And that's not to say that he will succeed. He could be dead by the end of episode 10. But I think it does represent this idea that some of the younger generations may be looking up or going, maybe we could do better than this. Maybe this isn't actually, this society I was born into maybe has some things that are wrong about it that I could, as part of it, change over time. And I think that's a natural thing to also have in here. So yeah, it's a great episode, and it's probably my favorite episode since I don't know, at least a few ago. I think not only does everything come together really well by the time you get to the end with Toranaga's sort of like cause and effect of everything, but there's a lot of really good motivational transitions in the scenes. Like Blackthorne having his encounter with the other man from his ship, and that leading straight into him going to Yubashige. And even the reveal that he's talking to Yubashige is a fun little, almost funny surprise. The way he's sitting there, like, starting to talk, and you think, oh, this is like he usually talks to Toranaga. He's even got Mariko sitting there translating. So when it cuts to Yubashige, it actually is a cool little fun moment. It's a little reaction you get from the audience, I think, because I got a little chuckle. I was like, oh, he's come crawling to him. And, and obviously their back and forth is quite funny, even through the translation. Also, a little funny moment is when the mistress from the brothel is looking at her land and saying, oh, this is where we're going to build this and that for a little brothel village or whatever it is. And then you see the priest, and he's been shown his plot of land, and he looks over and says, oh, who's that over there? And they're like, that's your neighbors. So even this is a funny little joke where he's realizing that the neighbors to the church is going to be a brothel, and that's quite funny. So I got a chuckle out of that. So, yeah. No, I think this is a really, really good episode that really played with the audience's expectations and did everything it could to keep dangling that carrot of Toranaga's got a plan. He's not actually surrendering, to the point where it's like, oh, it really feels like his most loyal advisor is believing that he's giving up, only for that to turn out to be part of, like, no, he understood his role, that this had to be the most believable thing in the world. Because now no one's going to question, really, that Toranaga's probably, like, done because his most loyal person has just committed seppuku. Although Lady Achiba, is worth mentioning, does say to Ishido that, like, hey, until we've actually got a blade in him and he's on the floor, let's not count out Toranaga. She seems to know quite well how good he is at his tricks and how good he is at planning things. So, she definitely is, at least intellectually, feeling like the main rival. But again, if maybe they do form some kind of alliance, I don't know. I feel like Mariko's going to try and set up an alliance by going to her. That's my guess right now. I don't think it's going to necessarily work, though. But we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this week's Shogun. We got 2 left. Looking forward to the last pair of episodes. So let me know what you thought in the comments below. You can, of course, hit the like button. Helps out a bunch on YouTube if you do. And you can support even more by going over to patreon.com/MetalFuzzTV and supporting for as little as $3 per month. But thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?